Hello there. I am Brian Walsh with Allegra. I am talking with one of my fellow LaTip Professional Networkers members, Nataly Kaiser. Why don't you say hi, Nataly?
Hi, Brian.
You didn't do the hi, Nataly thing?
Oh.
I said, say hi, Nataly. So Nataly is with Lavelle Law. They are a law firm in Schaumburg, Illinois. Many of you might know them. They're very big in the community. They do a lot of good social work as well. And they've got 34 lawyers, so I'm sure you probably ran into one of them somewhere. But Nataly focuses on business, and she chuckles. I didn't mean running like you've been sued by them or anything, but that you've probably seen them in your community or a networking group or a networking meeting or things like that. They're very outgoing and do a lot of things. So Nataly, her area of specialty is business law. So why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Nataly Kaiser with Lavelle Law, and my focus is business law and commercial litigation. Previously, before my career in the law, I did work on the business side. I was a finance manager. So I'm very aware of what it's like to be on the receiving end of advice from your counselor or from your lawyer about business deals and entering into different business relationships. So I try and keep that in mind with my practice, especially when I'm counseling clients.
Yeah, what was that quote that you'd given from, I think, Cicero?
Yes, from Cicero, one of the greatest attorneys of all time. He said, no one can give you better advice than yourself. And I firmly believe that's true, especially in the business sense, because so often these clients that I work with, they know their business better than anyone. They're in that grind every day. So they know what parts and elements of the deal are most important to them. And I try to really understand the client's business, step into their shoes, and just work only as to give them advice and alert them to possible roadblocks or situations that they could run into. But ultimately, the decision is up to my client, and it's because they know their business better than anyone. And I try to really, really stick to that and hear what their concerns are.
Cool. Well, I know, business law has a million aspects to it. I think any of us who are business owners realize that there's a lot of moving parts. But I know what you spoke with us this morning about was contracts. And I know it sounds pretty basic to most business owners, but why don't you go into a little more detail about what is a contract, what makes a good contract, and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. I spoke about contracts because I felt that's something that almost every operator or business owner or professional has entered into some form of a contract in their lives. It's very relatable. And so often we find when I get called as the litigator, it's when the contract has fallen apart or something has gone wrong in the relationship. And very often we find that contracts, a good, thorough, well-written contract is often an afterthought. It's something that you come back to when things go wrong. So in its most basic form, a contract is a promise. It's an enforceable promise between two parties. You know, you have an offer, you have an acceptance, and then you have consideration, whether that's money or services or real estate. And why are contracts important? Well, they make it as clear as can be. What is expected of you, what's expected of me, and what is supposed to be done and by when. So contracts are there to protect us. They're there to set the terms of the relationship early on. And so often we find when we're disputing contracts in court, we get into the nitty gritty, the details that no one really wanted to give attention to in the beginning. So ultimately, my talk this morning is to caution everyone to consider consulting an attorney before entering into a contract. Or if you want to revise a contract or adjust terms, definitely have a professional take a look to make sure you're protected.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you real world experience on, I know one of the other things you had mentioned was reviewing those contracts on an annual basis was a contract that my mother was in where they had not updated the value of the stocks every year as they were supposed to, as deemed in the contract. So when she passed away, it turned into this whole, well, what was the real value of the company at that point? Because they had grown several times of what the original value was. So, updating all that. And ironically, Lavelle Law helped me win that case, just putting that out there. But yeah, so talk about that. How often should you review your contract?
Yes, definitely. When very often we find clients just like that situation where a contract was written and thoroughly vetted and reviewed at the inception of this relationship or at the inception of this business, an operating agreement. And then no one ever looked at it again. Everything in the relationship worked well. She continued to own interest in that business. So ultimately, when her exit from that business came, oh wait, we have this archaic document that doesn't really capture the present value or doesn't really capture the current relationship that I'm in with this business. But unfortunately, it's the only written piece of evidence we have dictating the terms. So in that example, very often we have great provisions that we can include in operating agreements that say at the time that this person is going to exit, the value will be set by unanimous vote of the shareholders, or we would set a formula that can adjust to the growing nature of the business. But in a more general sense, I highly recommend looking at some of your principal contracts, some of your principal arrangements with vendors, suppliers, partners. Look at those annually if you can, maybe every 2 years. The more often you're looking at it and checking to make sure your contracts are keeping up with the nature of your business, the more you can ensure that you're protected, that it's capturing reality, that it's capturing your actual interaction with that other party. And that's really where we avoid instances where we have to rely on something that's not even relevant anymore, but unfortunately it's what's in writing.
Right. So rolling into 2021, coming off the crazy 2020, is there anything very specific that everybody should review a contract for, a business owner, or anything new that we need to make sure we cover, anything like that?
Sure. Well, definitely with the pandemic and the new parameters we have working with COVID, there's a lot of language that people are adding into their contracts to ensure that they are compliant with the general guidelines for health and safety. A lot of vendors that work with the outside population are putting in new provisions into those contracts about notice if there is an infection at their site, things like that. But I want to take it back to basics and remind everyone, some good pillars to look out for, or good best practices are to look at, what's a dispute resolution clause in your contract? Do you have to go through litigation, or do you have lower measures of dispute resolution like mediation or arbitration that could then be confidential and protect, your brand as you go through that dispute? Other clauses we look for are attorney's fees. Very often clients don't realize that if you don't include recovery for attorney's fees in your contract, you're going to put the bill on the fees for your attorney if this turns into a litigation or a dispute later on. I would also caution signing personal guarantees. A lot of contracts include language about having an officer sign individually as a personal guarantee as well. Please don't sign personal guarantees without having an attorney look at them, because in a sense, you're avoiding that protection that you get from your business, your limited liability company, when you sign individually, because you're guaranteeing the debts of the business on your own. So just some hallmarks to look for, things that we've seen in contracts. We've encountered them, but we don't really question what they are because they're so common. Bring those contracts to us. Let us look at them and make sure you're protected.
Right. So, and you had talked there too about like forming the LLC and the whole veil of protection and all that. A lot of solopreneurs these days, why would it be important to have a corporation in front of you to protect yourself?
Sure. When we talk about entity formation, a corporation or an LLC, what we're saying is we're trying to separate you, the owner, from the business. It's that veil of limited liability. In the most simplest terms, it's saying that you are not personally liable for the debts of the business. If that business gets into obligations it cannot meet, like different loans or debts, essentially the creditor can reach the assets of the business but not go after you personally, like your home, your car, your personal assets, your personal accounts. That's why we always suggest, at the very basic, every business owner should form an LLC at least, or some form of a corporation, or some legal business entity to get that separation, get that veil of protection.
Cool. All right. So contracts, business formation, anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. Just real quick, every business operator has different obligations, different interactions, whether it's with their employees, their customers, their managers. I would just recommend come speak with us. We do a 1-hour free consultation, ask your questions, make sure you are protected, that you have the right tools and instruments in place in the form of contracts, employee handbooks, corporate policies. Reach out to us and let us know what are your concerns, and we'll try and meet them.
Cool. And one more thing I think people should know, you personally speak Spanish. So if you're looking for a lawyer to help you out who speaks Spanish, Nataly would be, and I don't know how to say that in Spanish, but perhaps Nataly would.
Sure. Hablo español. Puedo ayudarte con todas sus preguntas de la ley y consulta con negocios y empresas.
Yeah, what she said. So yes, reach out to Lavelle. They've got you covered. Real quick on LaTip. So I meet with Nataly every Tuesday morning with a group of other professionals, and we go through kind of what we're looking for as businesses and how we can help each other and pass tips around to each other. And if you are interested in joining a meeting, you're welcome to come to 2 with no cost or obligation. Obviously, right now, to be safe, we are doing Zoom, but we have been remote since the pandemic. We've met every week except for maybe a holiday or 2. So LaTip Professional Networkers. And if you want any more information, reach out to either myself or Nataly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.